Okay, let's keep moving forward. Let's talk more on the security track. So, security track will focus on the security aspect of AWS. Now, this track may appeal to people who have some basic information about the AWS services. So, you would be needing some basic information about AWS to understand these track better. We won't be covering very fundamental details here, but we will be leveraging some of the basic stuff you may already know. And if you are little lean on the basic stuff, then probably you should be able to use environment by which you should be uh, we should be able to utilize these services on a longer run. So security track is something which should be all aware about. Security is a very important thing. Now let me ask you a question here. So this question is based on a cost of data breach report, which is published by IBM every year. And in that, they focus on various aspects of security in enterprises and short or small industries, maybe in different vertical, different businesses. And they compile a lot of data, like how much money companies spend on fighting the security event, how much loss they have, how much is the brand impact they have, all these type of things they have to do and find out into cost of data breach report. So I found this report very useful to understand the whole landscape of security. And one thing caught my attention was average time to identify a security breach. All of the companies are paying so much money on security services, hiring security professional, doing a lot of audit, going through lots of complicated software and implementation. Still security breach happens. So my question to you is, what do you think in your idea, what is the average time to identify a security breach? Obviously it will depend in industry to industry, depend from customer to customer, but what do you think is the average time to identify a security breach? Do you think it is hours? Do you think it is days? Do you think it is weeks? What is your guess of how to identify, how much time company on an average may take to identify a security breach? Okay, I'm getting answers here: days, months, hours, weeks, 12 days. Okay, let's see that. Okay, keep those questions come, keep those answers coming. And I was surprised to hear that number. Uber had one couple of months back. Uber had one. Yeah, it happens. So it is always happening. Uber had a very complicated structure that time. Their CTO had to go through a lot of firing because of they did not respond to it properly, or they did not make everyone aware. So yeah, there are lots of things which can happen. Now I would give you a number, and probably you would be as surprised as I was when hearing this number. That is 207 days. With so much focus being on security, with so much resources and money being spent on it, still there is a huge gap. So if a breach happen, maybe it may take up to 207 days for them to identify a breach. Again, it is a average information. It may depend on industry to industry, customer to customer, or industry to industry, but still it is a huge number. So I was surprised by that, as some of you are. Next was more important one: average time to contain a breach. So you identified there a breach, and now what you would do, you would start working toward fixing that problem, isn't it? So we find out there is an issue, and let's try to fix that particular problem. And again, it was not that easy. I was hoping it would be n plus 1 day. Maybe you find out next day you fix it. It was not the same. Again, average time to contain a breach is 70 days. As you could see, it's a huge time of 277 days which you may have taken to identify and contain a breach, which is very complicated stuff, as you see here. So it is complicated, and we need to identify that what we could do to bridge that gap, and how we could get this information in a better way, or how we could have avoided these type of things. But yeah, this is a common thing which happens across industry, and it is a very generic report. It is not specific to one industry, and that's a huge number, as you could see here. Right. So we want to bridge that gap. So AWS has lots of services related to security, and I would include a link for this report if somebody is interested in numbers. So check this report. It's a very interesting thing. You could go ahead and utilize that. Does it refer to hacking? It could be anything, mariachi in a jar. It could be anything. It could be an employee exposing credential on a GitHub. It could be somebody intentionally stealing information. It could be somebody just deleting something by mistake. These are all breach. Somebody doing a behavior which is not intended, it is a security breach, right? Something could be like, maybe I expose my public key or my private key into internet. Maybe I have removed my certificate from a website and it become unsecure. Maybe someone hacked in and removed my services. Somebody planned a DDoS attack. So anything which is not as per the standard we have defined for security, that is a breach. Could be a hacking attempt, could be internal employee making a mistake, could be somebody exercising the delete power of something. It could be anything. So that's all. Maybe social engineering. That is all the things which can happen. Yes, that is all will contribute towards a security breach. Right now, AWS has shared responsibility model. Shared responsibility model talks about that who is responsible for managing what in a AWS cloud, because it is both responsibility of cloud vendor as well as provider, so that we would need to have a better approach towards security. So let's go ahead and talk about shared responsibility model. I prefer to use analogies to explain things. Now, I live in a apartment building like this, and in this building there are responsibility for security on both of us. Building management is responsible for some of the aspect. I am responsible for some of the aspect within my own apartment. So let's see that. So building management has given me a door phone. So I live on seventh floor. I can always verify before remotely opening the door. So I had to always do that. I should not open door for anyone. If I get a call from main door, they, hey, there is a parcel for you, Ashish, I should check it and then only open the door if I feel they are legitimate person. So that is my responsibility. So building management provided me the tools, and it is my responsibility to use those tools for my own requirement. There is a camera. I have to ensure it is operational. I have to ensure it is not blocked. It is having sufficient space to store the data. If they have given me access card for accessing the or operating the lift, I have to keep it safe. I should not lose it. I should not be giving it to someone else to operate it on my behalf. They have given me lock and key for my apartment. So whenever I'm going out, I should always lock my apartment. That is my responsibility. And if there are fire exit in the building which is there, you should keep it clear. You should not be stuffing your things in that. Otherwise, it would be a hazard when there is an actual fire happening. So as you could see, we both are responsible. If my building management has not given a fire exit, then I can't do anything about it. So their responsibility, and based on the building safety standard, they have to provide the fire exit, and I have to keep it clear so that I could use it in the time of emergency. So same thing applies into cloud too. When you are talking about cloud, there is a shared responsibility of AWS as well as you. AWS is responsible for security of the cloud, the physical infrastructure, and you are responsible for security in the cloud. Once you start hosting your services, you decide on how you want to secure those specific services. If I go in little more detail, AWS is responsible for things like all the regions where they are operating their services, physical location, edge location, employee security, access, physical security of the data center. Then any base services like hypervisors, compute services, storage system, disk which are being used, databases which is being created, employee access, all is the responsibility of AWS. So they should take care of that. Once they have provided me a solid infrastructure to start on, I have to use that infrastructure, and now I have to take care of encryption. I decide what I should encrypt, what I should not. I should verify whether the data has integrity or not. Has somebody modified it? Has somebody has permission to modify that? Operating system patching, network and firewall configuration, which port I am going to open, whom I am going to give access, how my platform would be updated, how I update Java runtime, how I provide security to my application, how I protect my own data. So that becomes my responsibility into the long run. So that is how customers' responsibility would be there. So as you could see, both of us are responsible for maintaining security, and AWS then gives in more detail. So if you are using infrastructure services, like you are launching a AWS EC2 instance, right? So in that case, the base infrastructure is maintained by AWS. So they would be taking care of that. And your responsibility is to your client side data protection, encryption on the server side, network traffic protection. That becomes your responsibility if it is, let's say, service like Amazon EC2. Then I say, okay, I am looking for a less responsibility model for myself. I don't want to worry about all the stuff. So that's fine. You could do that too. You could go ahead for services like container services. Let's say Amazon RDS. Container here doesn't mean the Docker container. Container here basically means that it is a platform provided to you, and on top of it you deploy services. So that is your container based services on which Amazon RDS is there. You take care of data, we take care of platform and application. And if you want much lesser responsibility for yourself, you would be going for more security oriented services, which we call managed services. So services like S3, KMS, DynamoDB. Here you do not worry about anything, even platform or encryption. We select a checkbox, or in then uh, set in that particular solution, there would be a whole option to enable security or default encryption available on that. So if you are looking for more customizing of the thing, probably you should look for infrastructure services. And uh, then we would have managed services, which we would be helping us to create all these environment which is less customizable. So you decide on what is your security model. Now, there was a slide issue. Probably maybe a refresh would be required. You can see the slide properly. Thanks for confirming. Maybe a refresh is required for anyone seeing it. So this is called like bitrate, which gets automatically done by YouTube. So based on how the performance of network is, it would be giving you that is called adaptive bitrate. It will adapt to your network speed. Right. So now let me focus on the basic AWS security services. Let's go ahead and what is there. Now, what I am going to discuss right now in the next 10 minutes is going to serve as a base for the whole security track. So somebody had a question like what we are going to cover in security track. This is where I am laying out the foundation that how we would progress toward different aspect, and we would be seeing those information as we move forward. Let's go ahead and see that. So these are foundational and layered security services we are focusing on. There are different aspects of the services, and I would talk about which specific use case they serve. Because if I go to AWS console, there are hundreds of AWS services available, and maybe 20, 30 are security services. So every service has its own use cases. So where they fit in the overall picture, let's go ahead and talk about it. So let's say I want to secure my environment. That is my requirement. I want to ensure that I do not have any breach, I do not have unauthorized access in my environment. So what I have to do first, I have to identify what I want to protect. So let's say when you say that, okay, I have to protect my home, what you mean by protecting your home? Do you want to protect your courtyard? Do you want to protect the garden so that nobody can come and then vandalize it or maybe pluck the flowers from it? What do you want to protect? So if I want to protect my garden, my approach would be different. If I want to protect my valuable like cash or jewelry, my protection information would be different. So first you need to identify that what is available and what you want to protect for. So that is where AWS services would help you. And this is a partial list of the services. So you could identify your resources through Security Hub. You could identify those resources through Control Tower, Trusted Advisor, then Config, well architected tool, Systems Manager. They would give you an idea of what is all available, how many EC2 instances, how many Lambda function, how many accounts you have, what are the resources within that account. So all of that will be into identify phase, and these services align to identify. So we'll discuss some of the services into the next sections as we move forward. So first thing, you have to identify what you want to protect, right? Let's say if it is a VIP, like a president or a prime minister of a country, that person is to be protected, and then they would create security layer around him or her. That's how the identification has worked. Then what happens later? Then once you identify what is available, you start protecting it. And this is where we would be spending a lot of time in our whole security track. If you see here, there are some services which are for network protection, like transit gateway, private link, VPC, direct connect. And then there are some services which are related to encryption. So if I look here, KMS, Cloud HSM, then we have certificate manager. these all services helps you with your encryption type of mechanism. So that is one aspect of it. Then if you look here, other services are for your DDoS protection. So if we have AWS Firewall Manager and we have AWS Shield, these services will help me with my DDoS protection. And then when it comes to like identifying my user or performing authentication services on top of it, then we may use services like Active Directory, directory services, Cognito, IAM Identity Center. So they would be focusing more on the identity part of your application. And afterward, if you are looking for your network protection, there would be these services helping you out. So this is what we would be clubbing services together. So we will one time talk about all DDoS protection. We will talk about encryption one time. Then we will talk about identity services. We will talk about different directory services which are available. So this is how we would proceed with the whole security track. So once you protect your application, we hope nothing would go bad, right? Because we protected it. But that is not the use case all the way. So maybe happen that there is some breach happened in my environment. Somebody exercised excessive power than they were expected. Somebody tried to access an environment which was restricted. So that we have to detect. And when I say detect, it doesn't mean that I have to keep on staring at the monitor 24 by 7 to detect something. I want to leverage machine learning based services who would make my life easier, which could be things like Guard Duty, Cloud Trail, maybe you have Inspector, Amazon Messi, Security Hub. So these services may help me in detecting what is actually happening within my environment in a machine learned fashion or in an automated fashion rather than me manually looking for that information. So that is where detect type of services would come into picture. Again, it is not the whole list of services, but most commonly used services I've included into this particular track. Then if things go bad, we may want to respond to that. So what we would do, we would respond to those events. And again, when I'm looking for responding, I'm not looking for manually responding on that. We are looking for automation. So we would look for ways that how we could automate our services response. Maybe I could trigger a Lambda function. We detected that a user credential were used to log in from an unknown location, or that user has 100 time failed login attempt. Probably I should be blocking that user account because looks like somebody is trying to do a brute force attack on that user. I don't want to wake up in middle of night and fix that problem. I'm looking for automating that stuff, and that is where your CloudWatch, AWS Step Function, Systems Manager, Lambda, all these services will come into picture. So that is where I would be responding. Once I respond, I may also want to do further analysis, which is investigate. So I tried my best, and now what we are seeing that there are a lot of things which we have to investigate. Why this happened? Who exercised that problem? How we can track and find out what the problem was and how we can fix it into future. So that is where we would be looking for responding those services. So that's how response will be coming into picture, right? And then we may try our best, but what if in a corner case scenario, somebody was able to take over our account, delete our resources, or maybe there were some issues they created, they reverted my setting. I may want to recover from those failure which may have happened. And in that case, I may want to automate recovery like cloud formation. Maybe I could use ops work. Maybe my backup has to be restored. My data has to be restored. So that is what we would be doing in this whole training. So this is the way we would move forward. Here I tried to combine most services which are relevant in security. Not every service is covered, and don't be worried if you see some services being mentioned multiple times. Like if I look here for security hub, it is mentioned into identify also, and security hub may be utilized in some other places also, should not be a problem at all. So that is here. See, the security hub is here. Similarly, you may find systems manager is being used here in identification, and systems manager can also be used in automation. So services have lots and lots of information and lots of feature, so they may align to multiple locations and multiple layers within your environment, but we will see them and talk about it. So that is how all your services are put together, and they would help you in understanding that what is the overall landscape. We don't want to learn services in isolation. We want to see how they fit into the overall picture, that what we need to do: identify your resources, protect them, detect if anything goes bad, respond to those events, investigate, and recover if something has really gone bad. That's what we would be discussing in our training. And this aligns to the track. So let me bring up my security track information. This is the BESA website. So you could see it here. This is the agenda. Foundational track, we discussed data center. Next week I will talk about virtualization, we'll talk about network devices, then we'll talk about scalability, durability, availability here, encryption, disaster recovery, DNS. And then week 8 we kept open, so based on your environment, your requirement, we could make changes there. And here in security, I'm introducing the topic, then we'll talk about identify, then identity management. So we have more people who would be helping us. These are people from my team, they are technical trainers, so you would be getting information from them also about what other things are there. And then detection, remediation, and then open for suggestion. So we kept it little open ended so that you could give us idea, and we should be able to have a session tailored to your need and give you the best out of this particular program which we are running. So I hope that everyone has a better idea on how all these services are fitting together into the overall landscape of security. All right. Let's keep moving forward and let's discuss various aspects of security. Now, as soon as you start using AWS environment, the first service you would always come into contact is IAM, identity and access management. I won't be going into the all detail of IAM. You could check previous videos where I have detailed everything and covered a lot of examples too. So check those previous videos. But I want to quickly bring everyone on speed and on the same platform by talking about AWS IAM, identity and access management, how all these services are putting together. So when you are trying to request something on AWS, so you are basically making an API call. Everything is a API call. You are starting an instance, deleting something, allowing a user to perform something, creating a RDS database, creating a EMR cluster. Everything is a API call. And there are multiple ways to send that API call. But as soon as that API call is triggered to be going through AWS, two things happen. For every API call, IAM comes into picture, identity and access management, and it verifies whether this request should be allowed or denied. So you would be able to see that into detail, that okay, based on the requested condition, based on the resource, based on who requested, what they requested, should I allow this request or deny this request? And this happens for every API call you are making, whether you made one call to start instance, next call for stop instance, all the time your IAM would be verifying your allow or deny type of access. And not only that, along with that decision of allow or deny, that request is being recorded by CloudTrail. CloudTrail is basically a camera running in your account. Any API call you make is recorded by CloudTrail by default, and through that you would be able to know that who actually made that request and what they requested and how they requested. So that is all coming through IAM as a service. Once this is all done, then your request is released to AWS endpoint and your request is fulfilled and you get your requested either denied or allowed. That's how it would be working. Now, IAM is doing two things for you. It is doing authentication and doing authorization. I use examples to explain things. So let's say if you are traveling to other country, you would be probably going through a passport control, right? Unless you are king of Britain, you won't need a passport. Or maybe if you are king of Japan, they are also not having any passport, they are immune from it. But if you are a traveler like you and me, you would be needing a passport, and when you go to that passport control, that person would be checking for you. So the passport contains information about who you are, right? So there is a passport information which says who you are, and then you would have a visa, and that visa may be saying what can you do, what is your authorization. Are you a tourist, are you on a work visa, are you on a transit visa? That is what we mean by authorization, what can you do. And then there is a authentication which says who you are, what is your name, what is your date of birth, how you look like, that is here. So this is done by this passport control officer. That is the exact same thing which is happening with AWS IAM. It verifies who you are and it checks whether you have permission to do that activity or not. So IAM is all about authentication, which is through user group and roles, and IAM is all about authorization too, which is basically based on what policies are available and how I can allow someone to do the task they want to do or restrict them when you don't want to do that, right? So we would be able to see all these things. All right. Now, accessing AWS services, how it works, you have multiple ways to access AWS service. So management console, command line interface, tools and SDKs, that is all available. You send requests, all of them is basically a API call. When it comes to AWS management console, you provide an account ID, you provide a username and provide a password, maybe optional multi-factor authentication is there, and through that you perform login to a account. When it comes to your command line interface and SDK based call, what you are needing, you need a access key and secret access key. It is the randomly generated number by AWS for your use case, and that is what is used to authenticate you that you are Ashish or ABC or XYZ in this command line interface. So that's how your information is. Now, if I could draw that, I would draw like this. So command line interface is also a software and it is using SDK to send requests. So it looks like it is sending requests directly, but technically speaking, it is still just a software who is leveraging the SDK written in Python and sending my request to AWS endpoint. And that's how we would be able to access AWS services. So how IAM works, what are the component within IAM? I am covering basics. We have covered it in detail and thanks Parna for sharing that link. You could watch that video, you would get all the details on that. So identity center has this, sorry, identity access management has users. So users would help you with the individual who want to log in. You may have put them into groups like developer or QA or managers or approvers or auditors. Then we have roles in that. Roles are temporary way of assuming a permission and performing some task. And in IAM, you could create policies, which will be a basically JSON statement which says what is allowed, what is denied, and what you could perform or cannot perform. So these are the four basic building blocks of IAM: user, group, roles, and policies. There is one more, identity provider. We will talk about that into the next sessions, but these are the very fundamental blocks of AWS IAM as a service. If I have talk about relationship between them, policies can be associated to role. Policy says what you are allowed to do. Like this one says S3 allowed, EC2 allowed, but RDS is denied. So we are putting a policy on the role. That's how it is working. Policies can be associated to group. We could utilize that. And then we could also have a policy associated to a user if the need be. Right. So this is how we are able to provide information. So user, group, resources, and roles, these are all considered as identity within my AWS environment. Now, what other relationship exists between them? A user can belong to a group, right? So a group can be given permission. So it will make my life much easier rather than giving individual permission. I should be allowing people to access group-based permission. So that's what we could do here. And then user can assume a role. This sometimes confuses people, so I would explain a little bit on the role side also, that how roles actually work. But roles are a temporary credential. They are always represented by a hat. By that hat I am wearing and becoming something. I'll explain roles in a minute. A role can also be assumed by a resource, like a EC2 machine may assume a role, and then that machine's code can perform some operation on my environment, like it is trying to access a S3 bucket. So it got a role assigned, and through that role, it is able to access that S3 bucket. That is completely possible. Further, a user can access a resource directly, like S3 bucket. I could create a bucket policy and add that user's name there. So that is called a resource policy. Policy can be also associated to a resource, and based on that, my users would be able to access the services if the need be. That is called my IAM summary. Right. So IAM has these component, and check that YouTube video where you will get more information on that. Now, let me talk about roles because that is the most commonly misunderstood concept, or it is little different concept than real world or in other environments. So let me talk about what is the information about roles. So I would take an example here. Let's understand role by example of Jim Carrey. I like this actor. He's a Canadian American actor. You have seen him performing into various movies. Like these are some of the notable: Bruce Almighty, where he played a role of God. In The Mask, he played a role of a green thing. In the S. Ventura Pet Detective, he played a role of Pet Detective. So consider this is the same person, Jim Carrey. But temporarily, he will take makeup and do makeup and then will become this person. Then he would have a different hairstyle and different way of talking and walking, and he become S Ventura. And here he would be behaving completely differently, and you would be able to see that what he is doing in his role of God, Bruce Almighty. So he is the same person, but he is assuming different role at given time. Maybe these all three movies are being shot parallelly. So maybe in the morning shift he is into the mask, so he wears this makeup. In the evening he is performing these, and in afternoon he is doing this kind of makeup. So that's what he is doing. He is into different role. He is same person, Jim Carrey, but depending on movie environment, he is changing his appearance to become something else. And what we mean by assuming a role, I like this example the best. Probably all of us have seen that movie, The Mask. Here, this magical mask, once this mask is worn by this person is Stanley Ipkiss, but once he wears this mask, he becomes the green thing, and then he is able to rob bank, change into different shapes, do a lot of comedy and all type of thing. So what he is doing, he is assuming that role. So he is Stanley Ipkiss. He becomes mask when he wears this mask and removes it and becomes Stanley Ipkiss again. Same way, in roles, what you do, you log in with one person's identity. Let's say I log in at Ashish, and then I assume a role of auditor, I assume a role of sales inspector, I assume a role of anything else, and that's how I am becoming someone else. But that is temporary. So right now I am into a trainer role. I am training you. Maybe in the evening I go to a salsa class and I would be a student there and learning salsa. Right. So that's how I'm switching my role. I'm a father. So right now I'm not playing that role. But once my son wakes up, I would be playing that role. So that is what I'm doing. So I'm same person, but I am becoming someone else for a while and then become someone else once my work is done. That is exactly what we mean by assuming a role. Right. Let's keep moving forward. Let's see how all these things work. In role, there is one more thing which is called who can assume a role. Now, again, I take an example here from Marvel Comics, Thor. Probably you know that particular character, and that Thor person has a hammer as his weapon, and that called Mjolnir. And Mjolnir can only be lifted by Thor. It trusts Thor to lift it, right? So not everyone can lift this hammer. This hammer can only be lifted by Thor. Basically, think a policy governs this hammer and says, are you Thor? If you are, you can lift me. If you are not, I won't allow you to lift me. And that's what we mean by a trust policy. So when there is a role, that role has a trust policy which says how we are allowing who to assume that role. So that's how I should be able to have a policy of selecting who can assume that particular role. That's how your trust policy would be working. So trust policy gives you a permission who can assume that particular role. Here I am depicting into technical term. So what happens here, so permissions are assigned to a role. I can assume a role provided that role trust me to be assumed, and then other services can also assume a role. So with role there is a IAM policy which says what you can do after you assume a role, and there is a trust policy which says who can assume this role. So there are two type of policies with the role: what a role can do and who can assume this role. That is called trust policy, and the IAM policy is called permission associated with the role. So I hope this thing is clear and you have a better understanding. Again, same relationship. IAM policies are assigned to a user. They can be assigned to a group. IAM policies can be assigned to a role. A user can assume a role. A AWS resource like EC2, Lambda function, Glue crawler, they can also assume a role, and that's how their services would be working. So hopefully this relationship is clear. What is a role? And I would quickly summarize some of the information here so you would have a better understanding on what a role is and what can be done by that particular role. Let's talk about that. So roles can be assumed within AWS account or across account, right? So what I can do, I could go ahead and say I want to assume a role within my account, or I want to assume a role in different account altogether. So that is all possible. You could do that. At a time, only one role can be assumed, right? So at a time, Bruce, sorry, at a time you may be wearing one hat at a time, right? So that is all possible. You can only wear one hat at a time. You can be appearing in one movie at a time. You have to then remove the makeup and then go into different movie. So that is what we mean by at a time only one role can be assumed. You log off from one role and become another, get into another role. They are temporary permission. And trust policy, you could check more detail on the video. You should be able to see that. And group, yeah, group cannot assume a role because group doesn't identify. Like, role is a identifiable entity. If that is a group of 100 people, now I can't pinpoint who assumed the role. So that's how you would not be having a group assume a role. Group can be given permission to assume a role. Maybe we could say if you belong to developer group, you could assume developer role, but still I have to first identify myself as individual, and then I can assume a role. Should not be a problem. So that's how we should be utilizing on that, right? So hopefully this thing is clear. At a time, only one role can be assumed. Trusted entities to assume a role can be external, SAML or web identity. My users can be coming from additional resources or additional places like Active Directory or SAML, and then we can assume that. Behind the scene, what happens when you assume a role, there is a service which is called Security Token Service, or STS for short, and it allows you to assume a specific role based on your own permission. And you could assume role through web identity also. Like, you may be a user into a different environment, and through that you could assume something. So let's say I log in with Amazon here, I become someone, and based on that I should be able to perform some operation in AWS environment. I hope I remember my password properly. No, but you could check that. Maybe you could log in with Google and Amazon and play around with this particular web identity playground. It will show you what happens. So you log in, you then obtain temporary credential, and then based on that you are allowed to perform access of AWS resources. So you should be able to use it. The question, so you don't log and you have the role, you can choose to assume a role. First time you have to log in on parallel. First time I have to identify myself as who am I. I have to first log in as Ashish, and once I have logged in, I would be then able to access that particular information. That's how we would be using this information, right? So that we have to first take into consideration. So I hope everyone is clear and have a better idea on what all this information is and how it works. What I have also done on my website, I have included one pagers of all these services or lots of services. So you could check details of my website, analogiescloud.com, and there you would find some YouTube videos I recorded. These are apart from BESA. Some Udemy training I published. These are all free resources. Some books you could buy if you want to learn more. And then there is a drag and drop activity, obviously information about BESA. And this is what I was talking about. There is service summary card in PDF format. So you could go ahead and download one single PDF which talks about all the aspect of a service. So if you want like one page information about a service, you should be able to access it from that website. I call them service summary card, which talks about all the 7 W's of that: what, when, where, who, like IAM, who can use it, how it works, how much is the cost, why I should use it, when I should use it. So all of this data is available into IAM as a service. right? So I hope everyone is clear and have a better idea. And we are now ending this first session. But as I said, the agenda is there. You could check it. You could suggest something if you want to change, and we would be happy to accommodate as much as we can, depending on the time and availability and the technical knowledge we have for these services. So check this website, check the agenda, and tune in on the time. Every day, the same link would be there. We have right now broadcasted it on Twitch and YouTube parallelly, but eventually we would only use YouTube. We won't be using Twitch anymore because it takes a lot of time for us to export videos from there to YouTube. So we would be using YouTube as a mechanism for future sessions. So I hope you enjoyed and learned something new and have a better idea about AWS services. Security track is defined to be, or it is optimized for learners who already know about AWS. If you are new to AWS, probably you should look for previous videos, attend foundational track, learn basics of security, and then you could get more understanding from the previous recorded videos. Shouldn't be a problem at all. All right. So I hope everything is fine and enjoying the things. I would stop my screen share. These resources would be made available to you onto the BESA website. It may take 1 or 2 days before we publish the PDF files there. So we should be able to provide these resources to you. So I hope everyone has enjoyed and learned something. We want feedback, what you felt, how we could improve it, what worked well for you, what didn't work for you. We obviously won't be able to cater it to every single individual's need, but if there is a group feedback we are receiving or a common feedback, we would try our best to accommodate those things with us. So thank you. And now we would go to the next part. Homework, I would say you can watch the YouTube video of IAM, and that would be really a good way to learn about IAM. So please check the IAM video. Parna already shared the link, and you could check into our YouTube session that on the YouTube channel. You should be able to get more details on that. Shouldn't be a problem at all. So please use that method of communication for all of it. Now, what I'm going to do, I'm going to invite Abhijit to the talk, and then you should be able to talk. He would help us in understanding what is a global engagement manager, what is his day-to-day task, and if you have any questions for him, we should be able to take it from chat and let him answer those specific questions. So, Abhijit, I hope you are here, and thank you for your time. I will add you to stream, and then I'll stop for screen sharing, and I would